Welcome to another episode of Embracing Diabetes. I'm Dr. Liz Stevens.
And I'm Amy Stockwell.
And today we have the distinct pleasure of talking with filmmaker and documentarian Lisa Hepner, director and producer of The Human Trial. This amazing movie follows the story of two patients with type 1 diabetes who are involved in a groundbreaking clinical trial attempting to cure them of their insulin dependence. The project was born out of Lisa's own experience with type 1 diabetes, which she has lived with for 30 years, and the frustration of the ongoing mantra that the cure will be here in 5 years. Despite all of this, she remains hopeful. During the conversation, we get to talk with Lisa about her life with diabetes, how it has impacted her work, and her journey with the documentary industry.
So you're our first interview.
I'm the first one. Holy moly.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
No pressure.
Oh, no pressure. Gosh, not at all. Yeah.
Oh, that's so wonderful. I'm really happy to be here. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. You guys are doing great work in your space.
So one of our questions that we're going to ask everybody kind of as a lead off is, if you feel comfortable with it, just tell us a little bit about your personal journey with diabetes when you were diagnosed, and maybe something that stands out from that experience that was memorable. I think we all have like something that really stuck out with us.
No, absolutely. I think any of us with type 1 have this memory etched forever in our minds about when we're diagnosed, and whether we knew it at the time, how life-changing that diagnosis would be. You know, I liken it to, where were you when JFK was shot? You know, that's my mother's generation. But, you know, it is so deeply profound when we're given that type 1 diagnosis. And for me, I was diagnosed when I was at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. I was studying my year abroad. I was at the University of Toronto, and I went there having worked 2 jobs, summer jobs. And, you know, I really wanted to, you know, spread my wings, so to speak. And so I did. When I went to Edinburgh, and within a month of being there in 1991, I got diagnosed with type 1. And it was really random because I was showing the symptoms of DKA, but nothing that needed hospitalization. And I think this is actually a great takeaway for listeners, is that in order for me to get free healthcare in Edinburgh at the university, everybody had to submit a urine sample and get weighed. And so, you know how much you can tell from a urine sample. And they're like, you have glucose in your urine. And I said, what do you mean? I'm drinking a lot of Guinness. Is that why? I mean, I literally started as probably the most ignorant person about diabetes, and my parents knew nothing about it. My dad was living in LA, and he's like, get a second opinion. This can't be. I don't even know what that is, diabetes. And then my mom, who was living in Ottawa at the time, said, God, I think your great uncle has type 2, but that's not hereditary. So it really was quite a profound moment. And when you ask about that searing moment, when I was diagnosed, it was when literally I was by myself in this clinic. Dr. Hepburn diagnosed me, ironically enough. And there was no one in the clinic. And the doctor checked my feet. And I was like, why are you doing that? Diabetes is the number 1 reason for amputation in the UK.
God. Oh, God.
Welcome to the party. This sounds terrible. And and I was also high. I mean, I was like 26 millimoles times 20. I was high. So I wasn't feeling well.
Right.
I was by myself, 21. And then the most searing moment perhaps was after they showed me a quick video on hypoglycemia and how bad it is. They sent me home on my bicycle, student house, and said, just check in with the nurse this weekend. I was on my own. And I rode home in the rain, in the Scottish rain. And I thought, I think my life is over. That was my beginning.
And you stayed. You stayed, or did you go home?
I stayed. I think perhaps my family, because we were so ignorant, minimized the diagnosis. And I went around Europe by myself with my backpack, went to Eastern Europe. And my mom now says, God, Lisa, I don't think I would allow you to do that. It was just me and my little pens, my needle pen.
Wow, that's quite a story.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart how many. And you are a doctor, Liz, so you know, but I just don't know if doctors know the
the power of their language, and especially in those initial diagnoses. And I mean, everything they say, even the word diabetes, I was 14 and I was like, die. It has the word die in it. I'm going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not handled as well as we would like. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sticks with you, I think.
And often I think it creates this sort of form of PTSD, honestly. I often we have to get past that whole narrative just to kind of even have a relationship that someone's got to tell me their whole story. And it's really awful.
You know, what I would add to it is that, interestingly enough, I mean, endocrinologists like yourself, I mean, you understand the severity of the disease and how, intense the management is. But at the same time, I mean, do you have the bandwidth to also be like the therapist, walk the patient through and to navigate these new hurdles? And I do think, having been in the trenches for a long time, that we do ask a lot of our endos. And it is a tough job. So hats off to you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it is. I think there's oftentimes that I feel very out of my comfort zone with coping. And I've developed all these like smart phrases in Epic, which are basically these lists of things that you provide to people like our counselors and just all sorts of, resources online and just places to look for information, because people are often really alone. They just don't know anybody, which is why your movie is so important. Is that I think at any time we can create community, it's just like so helpful, because it is so much work and people just navigate it all by themselves.
And I think those of us who are involved in the community have skewed perceptions of, because we know so many people online and we are so connected. It's easy to forget about those people who are living in more rural places, who maybe they're the only one with type 1 in their school or something. And I still believe there are a lot of those people out there.
There are
so many. And this is, honestly, what I like to talk about is Greg Romero, patient 2 on the trial. He's such a sweetheart. He was really surviving on his own. He didn't know anyone with type 1 until he met me and Morin, patient 2. And he knew his father, but his father had gone blind. Glycemic episode that left him brain damaged and was found 3 days later in his apartment.
Oh, God.
Greg didn't know anybody. And I think it's really important for us professional diabetics, because we are.
Right.
And I say this with great respect to us, but we live in our bubble.
Totally.
And we live in our bubble. We have access to the care, the treatments. But when you look at the statistics, which are really alarming, there are people behind those stats. And last year in 2021, 6.7 million people died from diabetes. 6.7. That's type 1 and type 2. Is the size of Utah and Connecticut.
Wow.
And where, this is the thing when you have the group of professional diabetics who, talk about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and I did it, and, you can do anything. I don't take that power of those words away from them, but I ask them for a larger perspective, right? Those who are behind you, and no shame. I don't like it, honestly, when people say, well, we have the tools, we have the resources, and by the way, we can get that HbA1c of 6. Well, a lot of people can't. And even those, and I hate to sound like I'm on my soapbox, but I think I probably am. There was a study done, I think 3 years ago, that showed that 22% of people who were on all of this treatment and gadgets, treatments, devices, only 22% actually got in the correct HbA1c range. So that means there are a lot of us getting complications. And like I said, not to mention the people who can't even afford.
Right. Yeah, that's a lot of people.
I definitely get on my soapbox too about being grateful that I have good state insurance, that I can afford to be on a pump and a CGM, but how frustrated I am that it's not available to everybody. But just to go back a tiny bit, I'm very curious to know about your background and how you got into filmmaking and documentary making, and which I imagine is very much a male-dominated field, unless I'm wrong, and navigating that as a woman with a chronic illness. Tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
I'm happy to say that in documentary filmmaking, nonfiction filmmaking, there are a lot of women, a lot of great female directors and producers. And in fact, most of my mentors are women. So I'm happy to report that. Hollywood's a different story, but I am happy to see that women are directing narratives more than ever. In terms of handling the demands of production and the instability of being in this field, living with a chronic disease, I didn't handle it very well. I hid it. I didn't purposely hide it, but nor did I talk about it.
Right.
So, when I was eating a crew meal on set, obviously, if I wasn't on the pub or whatever, but you'd see me inject and I'm like, yeah, I have type 1 diabetes. And everyone's like, oh, quick, cool. No one thought about it, really. Who cares? It's like my deal, right? But I did hide when my blood sugars were super high because I didn't want anyone to think I was groggy and I couldn't direct a scene. It brings me back to an example of when I was in Costa Rica and I was directing a surf video. And I had my insulin in my bum pack around me because I was doing shots at the time. My insulin literally cooked in the heat. Right? I didn't know that. I didn't know that that's what happened. It was like 20 years ago. And so I injected insulin that wasn't working. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm 350. Oh my God. I can't think straight. But did I tell anyone? And should I have? Yes. And then I went home to my amazing CDE, Carolyn Robertson, who I adore. And she said, Lisa, don't you know insulin's a protein? It cooks.
Right.
Yeah. So
why don't we tell? Why is it so hard to tell? I mean, I have many examples of doing that myself.
You get diagnosed, you get a starter kit, you hopefully join a support group. But knowing how much it impacts every aspect of your life, I don't need to tell you guys this. There's an overwhelm factor. And so it's kind of like on you as a patient, do as much research as possible.
And in those moments, I think too, if you told someone and they didn't know, I mean, they wouldn't necessarily know how to help you. So then you've got you and this other person who's anxious about what's going on. I mean, people often think when low blood sugars, you're supposed to take insulin. There's so much misunderstanding about how everything works. So, yeah, it can be tricky to pull in the team, It's great if it's someone who knows what to do, but sometimes that's not the case.
Yeah. And I was single at the time. I just want to add that I was single, navigating New York City and producing on my own. And my family, God bless them. I love my parents very much. I really do. And they've done a lot in the diabetes community since my diagnosis. But they didn't really understand because they didn't live with me. They never saw it. It was my diagnosis. So no one ever came with me to a doctor's appointment. Right. Until Guy, my fiance, I was like, you need to meet my endo. I love him. And you need to meet Carol. I love her. They're my lifeline. And Guy, who's a great guy and my husband now of 14 years, he said, sure, I'd love to meet them. And he's been really helpful to me.
How did you go from the documentaries that you were working on and then deciding to take this personal, intense project on?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think some of it came from the fact that when I moved to LA with Guy in 2008 and I was 38 years old, I wanted to have a kid. I was already late to the game. I'm a type 1 and I couldn't work the hours I was working for like famous Hollywood directors, which I did sometimes because they would work in docs on the side. And I really wanted to be able to create my own space. So I had time to go to my doctor. That meant I started a company with my husband doing our own nonfiction project. This was one of the nonfiction projects because, it was very personal. Guy's learning curve was huge, being a partner of someone with type 1. And after a really, terrible night of hypos, Guy said, let's make a film. So it became an independent project at our independent production company. And both streams of work enabled me to see my myriad of doctors and to try and get pregnant.
So how, Liz, we didn't have this prepared in our questions, but just because it is such an important topic for women with diabetes, was your pregnancy, how was that experience? Was that a difficult experience?
I think it's very fair for me to be completely candid.
Yes.
I've talked to
my son about it so he knows. And that was really critical to me before I prefaced the story with that. I didn't get pregnant. I couldn't. It didn't work for me. So I did 4 years of IVF and all that commensurate misery. And, my husband and I, quite costly. And so we bartered videos, literally, with all of the reproductive endocrinologists. And we would make a website video. And I'd be like, okay, counts for 1 cycle, 2 cycles. And we did it because I really wanted to have a child. We really wanted to have a kid. So at 42, 3, 4, it wasn't happening. And it was definitive. So then we did a deep dive into what was next. Was it, adoption? Was it fostering a child? Was it actually using a surrogate? And because I know a lot about science, and at that point I knew I had learned a lot, I was like, man, let's make science work for us. Okay, we're going to go do the surrogate thing. And so it was, and I think this is fair to say, it's the first time I probably have said this, but it was an egg donor plus a surrogate. And we did it. So it was a beautiful creation. I say to Jack, you're my biggest production. You're and we couldn't be happier with him. We love him truly. And we're in touch with our gestational carrier, who is the surrogate. She's his godmother.
Oh.
It was a really amazing experience. And because it's about women, and I can say to you, I nursed. I didn't give birth, but I nursed.
That's awesome.
Protocol. I'm determined. I was like, I didn't get pregnant. And I didn't really think I would miss being pregnant because it's so stressful.
Right.
But I didn't want to be denied nursing. I did a protocol that enabled me to nurse.
And which was so great because I felt like while I was nursing, my blood sugars were even, I could eat whatever I wanted. I really didn't want to give it up. I was like, well, it's working out.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Kids. And you have the team. I always respect women who've gone through a type 1 pregnancy. And kudos to you guys.
Yeah. But, and that's what I want to spread the word on, that is that all I heard was how negative and how high risk it was, and how women with diabetes would have, giant babies, and how I went into it terrified. And I think we really need to do what we can to change stereotype, or to change that message, because I think it scares a lot of people off needlessly.
Or just creates a lot of anxiety through the whole experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Hard enough, but then, to be just like terrified with everything. And, truly, nowadays with stuff online, it's often not us. It's what do you think?
Right.
It's different websites and blogs. And
sorry that I keep getting sidetracked, but it's back to the movie. And then I'll turn it over to Liz. Tell us a little bit about Marin and Greg. I felt like I fell in love with both of them, and I want to know how they're doing, and how did you get connected with them, and did you have to work with them a lot to like coach them on how to talk to the camera, or was it like purely organic conversations? I would love to know about that whole process.
I love Marin and Greg, and I'm so happy that you do too. And I'm really happy that we captured their personality on camera. Mm-hmm. They are amazing. I text with them. In fact, I've been texting with them today, because they're flying in. We're flying them in for our Canadian premieres of the film in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. So I'm really excited to see them. But just to say about the casting process, which I'm going to put in quotes, casting, we didn't have much say at all in terms of which patients we profiled, because we didn't get access to all of the clinical trial sites. We got access to the University of Minnesota, and hats off to them. And thank you for giving us access. But we met patient 1, Marin, when she was considering going in the trial. And then we met patient 2, because the clinical trial coordinator said, oh, you might want to talk to Greg. Mm-hmm. They were patients 1 and 2 already. So we had no say. Lucky. Really, really lucky.
And you had no idea what they were going to be like on camera. in the beginning.
No, not really. And this is the leap of faith you do as a documentarian. You jump off into the abyss, but you jump off holding the subject's hand.
Mm.
And when it works, you're jumping off together. And it's definitely a leap of faith when someone agrees to let you in their role, to let you meet their family, to let you hear their deepest fears and insecurity, and to let you follow them in an experimental trial.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of trust from both of them to enable us to do this. And, certainly my being type 1 helped tremendously because they knew I knew. We had an unspoken language. Of course we did. And so we helped each other. They would lend me Omnipods if I ran out on set. I would get talks to Gray, the sensors. I think we have to help each other.
Right.
We have to help each other. And they were just very kind and generous to let us film as much as we did.
Yeah. I loved how, there's a bit of a stereotype, I think, sometimes in the type 1 community among healthcare providers, are that people with type 1 diabetes who take care of themselves are wealthy and white and have resources and all that kind of stuff. And I really appreciated how you gave us very sort of different people who came from different walks of life and had, just different experiences with their diabetes. And I always feel like, people are doing the best they can with what they have in front of them. People are very smart and they do the best they can. And I just really felt that with those two people. I thought it was great.
And then Marin she just texted me today that, she's on Ozempic, she's doing a Frieza, she loves a Frieza. Audience is for diabetes. Right? Yeah. Okay. And so she loves a Frieza, swears by a Frieza. And right now, her HbA1c is 5.9. Cartwheels. Like literally sending me emojis. And I'm like, girl, I don't know how you did that, but that's amazing. Yeah. So she's a person who, came from a family that was incredibly supportive. She also is a person who takes risks and likes to try everything, like wants to line up for a pancreas transplant. We'll have this stem cell line in, this little credit card implanted in her. She's always been doing clinical trials. And so this is a natural kind of step for her. But Gray, not so much. Gray doesn't have the resources that many people do. And so signing up for this clinical trial meant free supplies. Let's forget. And they deserved everything they got for free. Just look at all the time they gave and the surgeries and everything.
Yeah, for sure.
They were so brave. Just that came across. They were so authentic and so brave. And it was so heartbreaking to watch their journey. And yeah, their stories were really, really moving to me.
One thing we talked about too that I was curious was just the amount of emphasis on money. Like I thought it was very cool about how the people that were involved in the trials and the researchers seemed very committed despite not having a lot of connection. Like I kept thinking that one of those people would be somehow connected to diabetes, but it really didn't seem like it. And yet they were around. I don't know quite why they felt that way. Maybe it was you or I don't know, but it was for me, one of my biggest struggles these days is just how much everything costs, trying to get what they need and have to fight with insurance companies all the time. And it's just absolutely demoralizing. And so I was just curious how you managed that, how you thought about how you were going to portray that in the movie. Because, as it was kind of unspooling, I was like, oh, you could have gone down a different road and been like, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. There were so many themes to talk about in this film. I could have gone this way and I could have gone that way. There was so much. And that's why it took me a long time to edit the film. I did not want to make a film about, the cost of insulin. There was another film being made about that called Pay or Die. Let those great filmmakers do that film. I didn't want this film to be an indictment of Big Pharma. I think Big Pharma can do a lot better. But at the same time, that wasn't the focus of the film.
Right.
The focus of the film were the patients and the biotech company that is trying to push a cure forward. What does that look like? And so, that was the MO of the film. I learned so much. People still conflate biotech innovators with big pharma, really smart people.
Right.
And they're like, no, they're different. This little biotech company, they're the engines of change. Big pharma comes in possibly in phase 3 if they're showing good results. If the risk is mitigated and the benefits are high in potential. So it's a great time for big pharma to come in. So in that way, I do a nod to big pharma in terms of their role that they play in funding innovation. I certainly have a little, I call it my little sequence chapter on it. Why doesn't big pharma take more risks? So you don't have to go check to check. That's literally my quote in the film. And, it was hard questions for them to answer because they were kind of beholden to their big pharma supporters. So it's like, how honest could they be with me?
Right.
But I do know it would make life easier.
And then I think we're kind of, I don't know where we are in terms of time, but what are your next, so there were two things. One was like, what are you hopeful for? Like, there's really this message of hope, just, throughout the film. And I think the ending is very hopeful. And so tell me a little bit about how you're feeling now that you've been out and audiences have been seeing your movie. And I would imagine it's pretty inspirational. I would, I think I just can't even imagine how people respond to your creation of something that's kind of spreading the word a little bit.
It's an amazing experience to see it in a darkened theater. It's amazing. And I've seen it, in a theater just in LA. I was doing a Q&A after, and I saw people so moved. No one's talking at the end.
Right.
If they have type 1 or even if they have a chronic disease, I mean, it's really intense. And I think what the film does is reflect the intensity back to them. Because it's okay. Like, it's okay to say, this is really hard.
Yes.
It's okay to talk about your complications.
Right.
And what people have told me is that, for the first time, they felt that their experience was captured on film, that they could use it as, a crib sheet. Like, hey, you don't know what type 1 is? Watch this film. This is my life. Understand it. There were other, people who were very profoundly moved. One mom said to me in New York that, her 17-year-old son, took like kind of weeks to kind of able to formulate what the film meant to him. And, I don't want to upset literally the kids with type 1. I really don't. But that's not my mission with this film. My mission with this film is to change how diabetes is perceived by the general public, how cure research is perceived and understood by the general public. My goals with this film are to help accelerate cure research, show that it can be, and I'm not a Pollyanna, really, I come from a journalist background, but I fully believe that we can get there in 5 years. I know the community will yell at me and say, what are you doing, Lisa? You're selling the false hope thing. I'm tired of this. I've had it, 40 years. And you know what? I will still go on the record and say that I think it will happen in 5 years. And that's because I see the research. I've talked to top researchers and they tell me things and I see the data. And it certainly, I think cell therapy is the avenue that the so-called experts believe will come to a functional cure the fastest. Yeah. And I do think that's happening. And I think that's happening with Vertex in Boston. Doug Melton's lab at Harvard, his company was purchased by Vertex and Vertex just acquired Biosite.
Yeah, that was big news. Yeah.
And I was very happy. I don't look at it as a monopoly. I don't look at it as squishing the competition. Absolutely not. We are too loud. This community is not going to allow this squishy of the competition. No, this is only just going to help us. It's going to help us get to a cure faster because you have the smartest minds in the US in the cell therapy space who have come together to take really good data and really good results in the first couple of patients and take it to another level. And that other level is to get rid of the immunosuppressant drug. That is going to be done through hopefully CRISPR technology that is gene editing the stem cell line so that it is not discernible. It basically hides from the immune system.
Right.
And that's the Holy Grail. That's the Holy Grail. And they are working feverishly on it. And it's not just in America. It's in Canada. It's in England. It's in China. The big pharma players are in it. Everyone. Okay, this is another thing. I mean, I hope I get viewers, or listeners. I think that's great. But I do think that cell therapy is where people are placing their bets.
And coming from you, and especially the way that you kind of framed the documentary at the beginning, talking about how we all have heard from our endos that, cure is 5 years off, 10 years off. So in the end, hearing it from you that you really do believe that for someone who hasn't had hope, because I've been cynical for so long, it really renews my hope. And because of you, you're not giving us false hope. And I believe that.
Well, thank you for saying that. And what I realized, again, making this film is, sitting back and having some distance from that 5-year promise. That 5-year promise means something. Like if researchers in the medical community didn't think it was curable, they wouldn't say 5 years.
That's true.
But why would they be selling us a bill of goods? And I know that most people have their hearts in the right place. They see suffering and they do want to provide real hope. Frankly, this disease should have been cured by now. It's tricky, more tricky than people think, but it can be cured. Look at what we did with the COVID vaccine.
Right.
Shots in arms in 6 months.
Right.
Throw money at a problem, things are going to happen. You mandate collaboration between big pharma companies, governments, military was involved. Look at that. Science was working, right? It was there. But in 6 months, we had shots in arms.
Yeah.
It changed the trajectory of the virus.
Right.
I'm a big fan of science, let me tell you.
Was that always, I know we have to let you go, but was that always something in your background, or did you have to do a ton of research to be able to talk to these like brilliant scientists?
It was never in my background. I'm an English lit major. I write. I didn't do well in biology in high school. I would beg not to write the final exam. Yeah, no, it was not in my brain whatsoever. But becoming type 1, you have to learn a lot of it.
Right.
And math. So it just became integrated into my life. But in terms of actually understanding a clinical trial, how stem cells work, no, it was pretty intense, my learning curve. And my husband and guys, but we did a ton of research, talked to so many people.
Yeah, I bet.
And we were filming for a very long time.
Yeah.
10 years.
So one last question. I don't know, Amy, if you wanted to just ask about kind of how to give back.
Just for like a takeaway for listeners, what would you say? What kind of advice or what would you encourage people to do? People who watch the documentary and like me, when you see the scientists begging for money and not getting it and you're like, I want to do something. So what can they do? What can we do?
Thank you for asking that. And I think if the film has moved you or you feel that it really raises the awareness of what living with this disease is like, encourage people to see it. We have a TVOD release on November 11th, Friday, November 11th. And that means that we'll be on Google Play, iTunes, and Amazon.
Okay.
And we're doing a big launch for that because it's around Global Diabetes Day, World Diabetes, which is Monday, November 14th. So we purposely chosen that date as our TVOD release. Spread the word, buy it for $1.99. It is so important that our sales and our metrics are good so that we launch it onto Netflix and we launch it onto Amazon. We are talking to US broadcasters, but that's a little further down the line. I think if you want people to see it and share the word, the tangible, immediate is sharing on social, sharing word of mouth about the November 11th release. I also think if you want to host a screening, you can do that quite easily. We have this all set up on our website. You just click on host a screening. Thirdly, I think it's really important to know that you can lobby Capitol Hill and your politicians and your representatives to say, we need a cure yesterday. There are people on the Hill who are listening and want this to happen as well. There is a caucus, the Diabetes Caucus, that is led by Diane DeGette, a Democrat. Reed, a Republican. How wonderful is it that it's a bipartisan effort? How wonderful is that? And the Diabetes Caucus is huge. And it includes people, on the Hill who are personally touched by diabetes and many who aren't. And there is a specific thing that you can do to support what they're doing. And it's supporting Cures Act 2.0. Cures Act 2.0 was put forth by the Diabetes Caucus in November of 2021. And it is encouraging early money, seed money, be put into these kind of, biotech efforts, among other things. But it is powerful. And I do believe that money is the biggest obstacle. So if we can get past that hurdle, and you can call your member of the House and call your representative in the House, your voice will be heard. They need to listen to you. Even if it's an intern answering the phone, doesn't matter. They have to log the fact that you called. Right. It makes a difference. Yes. Yes. I want to add that Diane DeGette has a daughter with type 1 diabetes, who's the senator from New Hampshire. Jean Shaheen. Senator Shaheen, she has a granddaughter with type 1 diabetes. I think if they hear from the public and the community that what they're doing is important and to keep fighting, that just puts more fire in the burner. Sonia Sotomayor. Sotomayor, type 1. She has seen the film. She supports what we're doing.
That's great.
Yeah. She's an inspiration.
When is the premiere?
We did have our American premiere in our theatrical premiere in last June, but we did our Canadian premiere in Toronto and Montreal on October 24th and 28th, respectively. Then I'm excited about this. We're doing World Diabetes Day in Vancouver. Vancouver, UBC, University of British Columbia, is a center for excellence in research by JDRF. And there's only, 5 of them in the world. So, they turn the city blue for World Diabetes Day.
Very cool.
So we're going to screen that the 14th of November. And you can also check on our website, go under the watch tab.
Okay.
You can keep up and follow us on social, to post about where the film is being shown. Thank you so much, Lisa, for making time to talk to us and for all your advocacy and for putting such an important piece of work out there. It
was such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much. I'm so inspired by you. And I feel like so fortunate that we got to have a one-on-one with you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for making time. It was so great to meet you both. I hope to meet you in person.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Embracing Diabetes with today's guest, Lisa Hepner, director and producer of The Human Trial. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and maybe felt inspired or informed or less alone or all of the above. Please subscribe to Embracing Diabetes on all major podcast platforms and leave a comment, question, or review. Thanks again. We hope you'll come back for more conversations about diabetes.